would ask everyone on the panel on the Northeast Corridor to go ahead and come on up on the stage. While they're coming up, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We have 3 gold sponsors this year: Delta Airlines, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, and Southwest Airlines. And they're making the mobile app that is available, as well as tonight's industry reception that I strongly encourage you to stick around tonight and attend. The instructions for downloading the mobile app are on the table and also in the program. And if you would, if you want to also give us any feedback in there about the sessions. For the silver sponsors, we have American Airlines and Raytheon, Boeing, Jeppesen, and Leidos. They are also sponsoring the awards luncheon, and Harris is sponsoring the tweet wall. They're also a silver sponsor. So thank you for our bronze sponsors: AOPA, A4A, Alaska Airlines, BNSF Railway, CSSI, Garmin, Honeywell, JetBlue, NBAA, Thales, and United. This morning's breakfast was sponsored by Airbus, and today's networking breaks by IATA, MITRE, and Deloitte. And we'd like to thank our technology sponsors for keeping us connected during the symposium. GE Aviation is providing the complimentary Wi-Fi, which hopefully you're plugged into and connected back to your office. The instructions for that are, again, in the program and on your tables. And the charging stations, there's one in the back of the room and there's one out in the foyer, are sponsored by Rockwell Collins. We'd also like to thank ALPA for sponsoring the Speaker Ready Room, the tote bag that was sponsored by Metron, and it includes a notepad from General Atomics Aeronautical Systems, a sticky note organizer from Cargo Airline Association, a bottle infuser by Aerion, and a portable USB charger by United. And then finally, I'd like to extend our thanks for an industry partner of Airports Council International North America. With that, I am going to turn to Steve and this panel of experts that have been wrestling with the tough issues surrounding the Northeast Corridor. Steve, thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, everyone. Just so the folks in the audio booth know, we're in a different order than they asked us to be in. We're free spirits on the Northeast Corridor group. So Warren Christie is at this end, and Paul Rinaldi is at this end for those of you in the sound booth. So just a quick mention of the background of some of these fellows if you don't know them. I'm going to be exceedingly brief. Each one of them has had a long career and has done many things beyond what I'm going to talk about. But on the far end from me, Warren Christie, captain with JetBlue Airways and my co-chair on the Northeast Corridor effort that we've had underway for about 9 months. He's serving as Senior Vice President of Safety and Security and Air Operations at JetBlue. He also was, for 30 years, served as a U.S. Naval aviator. And just to make things exciting today, he's seated next to Captain Steve Dixon, who prior to his service at Delta was an Air Force pilot. So we've got both of them right next to each other on purpose. The sparks will fly shortly. And Steve is Senior Vice President of Flight Operations for Delta. He manages their day-to-day flight operations across 6 continents. He is currently qualified and flies an Airbus A320 and has been with Delta for 27 years. Next to Steve is Huntley Lawrence, a 32-year veteran of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. He became the Director of Aviation in January of 2017, and he oversees a $2.5 billion budget and 1,500 aviation professionals, overseeing obviously the airport infrastructure and supplying capacity to the system in the New York metro area. Thanks, Huntley, for joining us. Glen Martin was selected as Vice President of the FAA's Air Traffic Services also in early 2017. And he served in various positions in the FAA. Prior to that, was the FAA's Regional Administrator in the Western Pacific region. And previously in the ATO, he served in the upper Midwest, in the Chicago area, in a number of positions, and was also the air traffic manager at the New York, Cleveland, and Chicago centers. So thanks for being with us, Glen. And Paul Rinaldi certainly needs no introduction, but he's set a few records himself in his lifetime. He's, of course, the 6th president of NATCA. He was first elected in October of 2009 and has been subsequently reelected by wide margins in 2012 and 2015. And prior to that, he served 3 years as executive vice president at NATCA. He's also, of course, been a working controller for 16 years, primarily serving at the Washington Dulles Tower, in addition to other efforts. And he is involved, obviously, with the AFL-CIO on their executive council as one of the leaders in that organization. So just by quick background, I wanted to acknowledge all of them and for you to have a sense of the background they have as they come to have a dialogue with us today. First, I thought I would turn to Warren, my co-chair, to talk a little bit about how we got engaged in the Northeast Corridor effort, what some of the background to us starting our work was, and how Warren has helped guide us through some of the key challenges we faced. So Warren, would you like to start off?
Sure, thanks Steve, and first thanks to, it's been a pleasure working with you, Andy and Trent as well on the Northeast Corridor NIWIG, along with the rest of the industry that's been involved. I think the interest in the Northeast Corridor, it stems from the fact that over 50% of the delays in the NAS emanate out of the Northeast Corridor. And if you consider that area between Washington, D.C. and Boston, about 450 miles, the fact that it generates that amount of airspace disruption, obviously it deserves the attention it gets. So for that purpose, all of the, not all, but most of the major carriers have significant areas of operation in one of the larger cities in the Northeast Corridor. Then you also focus on just the commerce that's generated there. If you look in the New York, New Jersey area, there's over $90 billion of income that comes from the travel industry, over close to 700,000 jobs. And I think a lot of that generates interest in ensuring that travel, air commerce in and out of the Northeast Corridor works as efficiently as it possibly can.
So Glen, I thought I'd turn to you next. Obviously, industry's been engaged throughout the process in the Northeast Corridor work ethic. We've put together a broad range of industry recommendations that obviously FAA has collaborated with us on. And I thought I'd just get a sense from you about how you have seen the involvement of FAA as a partner in the process, and how you would articulate FAA's overall approach and commitment to working with the NIWIG on this key Northeast Corridor task.
Thank you, Steve. I think for us, the commitment is really in, this is going to touch many of our lines of business and many of our service units in order to accomplish. This is probably one of the first times we've been able to sit down with industry, actually focus specifically on an area of operations that we can define, but now we take everything that we possibly can look at, whether it be new technology, old technology, new procedures, and just day-to-day operations. And so to be able to focus on a specific area, bring all of that to bear from the FAA has been very rewarding, and I certainly appreciate the work the NIWIG has done to go through various suggestions. I think we've drummed up a few old ones and revisited them. I think we've come up with some new ones, so I think the work has been great. The FAA has also been taking these around to the facility level, and we've been working with the controllers and the airspace managers and traffic managers in each of these facilities, getting feedback on them, and we look forward to working to a finalized set of milestones that should be out very soon.
Great, thank you. Huntley, too often when we work on these kinds of projects, we really just think about the airspace and not as much about the critical surface infrastructure that supports everything we do in the air. From your perspective and your involvement, not only with this effort, but with RTCA more broadly, how do you see the ability of the Port Authority, as well as more broadly throughout the Northeast Corridor, other airport authorities, being able to contribute ultimately to the success of growing efficiency and capacity?
I think it's absolutely critical. And I think the first thing I'd like to say is I really appreciate the focus on the Northeast Corridor. I know it's a complex environment, but it's really a long time coming, and I really appreciate the leadership and the NIWIC to focus on this area. For us in New York, we are investing a lot on the ground, and for us to really realize our vision for our customers to improve the efficiency of our airports and the way in which people travel, it's important that we are focused not just on improvements on the ground, and we're making hundreds of millions of dollars investments in runways and taxiways, including facilities as well. It's no secret that we are turning LaGuardia completely upside down in terms of improvements and really replacing the terminals at that facility. We're replacing terminals at Newark Airport as well, and we've got significant plans as part of a long-term vision to do something similar at JFK. But working together, airspace, industry, and airports is critical to serve our passengers better in the future. So that's why we think this effort is critical to us.
So Steve, obviously managing a large airline on a global basis, how important to Delta, in your experience broadly across the industry, is this Northeast Corridor to the network itself, how it performs every day, and to the business outcomes that a commercial carrier is pursuing?
Yeah, well, thanks, Steve. And I'd like to also start out by thanking you and Warren for your leadership and moving this effort forward to, I think, some really great outcomes. It's a long journey. And also want to thank Margaret and Andy and the RTCA staff for all of their support, not only through the Northeast Corridor, but throughout really the last decade plus of my experience and all of our experience working together on these really thorny issues. And I think, you know, from Delta's perspective, as it is for a number of carriers in the room and really all the stakeholders, it's really important that we look at the system because, you know, when the Northeast Corridor was first proposed at the NAC, there was a lot of debate about essentially trying to boil the ocean. And this we had been looking ever since the RTCA task force about, you know, when were we going to take this on as an industry. And there were a lot of lessons that were learned over the last decade about, you know, do you pursue the newest and greatest, you know, the 100% solution, or is it more of an evolutionary approach where we are achieving revolutionary results, but it's going to take accomplishing a number of issues holistically, really, to be able to achieve the result. And Huntley mentioned, you know, frankly, what's going on the ground. You know, there are about $20 billion worth of airport projects going on around the country, and several of the most significant ones are in New York. There's been a good bit of work already done at Newark. There's ongoing work at Kennedy. You've got the complete reconfiguration of LaGuardia, and our network building a new airport out in Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, Seattle. Again, you name the part of the country, there's probably something significant going on. And obviously all these pieces interact with each other. So involving the airport authorities and that, you know, recognizing the investment that the community is making, not only in new aircraft capabilities, but also in ground infrastructure, particularly at a place that has the kind of structural constraints that the Northeast does, is extremely important. Because without those investments, we can do all we want to in the airspace, and it's not going to make a difference if we have gridlock on the ground. So that's extremely important to understand how we're working together. I also believe that you know, the work that the NIWIG has done is certainly the Northeast Corridor work has built upon the things that we have learned through the previous NIWIG groups and the importance of system thinking. And, there are some who think that, something like, GBAS is a great solution, or RNAV, RNP, or traffic flow management initiative. Those can't be looked at in isolation. They've got to be looked at, what kind of opportunities do they create? What off-the-shelf capabilities do we have, rather than just looking at a multi-year program that we can use to leverage to improve the operation of the system. So the increased use of data, metrics, we're getting better and better at that. But making sure that we're working hand in glove with the tactical initiatives that frankly are occurring between the FAA and the major carriers on an ongoing basis, and particularly as we prepare for each summer's operation. Every weather pattern is different, but certainly we learn from each one of those events. So taking those learnings and incorporating them into the strategic work is extremely important. Also, there's been a tendency over the years sometimes to have a laundry list approach of things that we want to look at. And the Northeast Corridor Initiative identified essentially 10 areas of operational need, but was able to prioritize them into 3 buckets. And those buckets you can look at as under the broad categories of deconflicting the airports from each other when we have to operate with certain runway configurations that tend to create suboptimal operations. We also have the opportunity to do some things that will better balance capacity and demand, and those end up having a throughput benefit as well. And that's where the work on the surface is so important. And finally, traffic flow management. I mean, ultimately, all this stuff doesn't work without dynamics decision making and making sure that we are working together to determine whether we're going to bias, for example, between departures and arrivals with a given weather system coming through the area, or as we have other operational disruptions that might be affecting one or more of the operations up in the Northeast. And then finally, I think it can't be understated that the collaboration that we have experienced, you're seeing some of the industry stakeholders here on this, represented on this panel, but really the industry has to lead this effort. We tend to be, despite the fact that there are some big companies out there, there are things that we can do and there are investments that we are making where we're able to be a little more agile than the FAA, frankly. And as we are taking hundreds of new aircraft into our fleets and reallocating some less capable aircraft to other parts of the country, which my airline has done over the last couple of years, we need to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. We know about those steps that we have taken, and they can provide some operational benefit. But if we're not all around the table looking at all that, then it's very difficult for the FAA to execute consistently on a plan that we've all agreed upon.
Yeah. So Paul, the vast majority of your life has been spent in the Northeast Corridor and focused on the challenges there. Yeah. And I think in some ways one of the really unique aspects of what we've been able to do in this effort has been the interaction with the facilities and the frontline controllers. Maybe you can share your perspective on how that's gone so far and what you think the right focus for the future might be.
When I first got into the agency, we were fixing the Northeast Corridor with the East Coast plan, and apparently that didn't work. But when we talked about we want to fix, it started out at the NAC, we want to fix New York, and then it spread it out. It's bigger than New York. It's the Northeast Corridor. I said, let's identify what's broken. The controllers in the Northeast Corridor do an amazing job day in and day out, completely efficient. Delays, yes, for environmental, weather, construction at airports, and the controllers across the country do an amazing job. So what do we actually, what's broken? What do we want to fix? Because if you look at our machines in a tower that tell us the arrival rates, let's just say it's, one every minute, and we have 20 scheduled in a 15-minute slot. Well, that's sliding to the next 15-minute slot, which has 20 also, which slides to the next 15-minute slot, which slides again. So you know, I drive I-95 every day, and I sit in traffic, and they built these hot lanes in the middle, and those are 2 extra lanes that go in there, and if you want to pay and go in there, then it's, you know, high speed into that, and it's saturation. It's just absolute saturation. The controller's doing an amazing job day in and day out. I sat for 4 hours in LaGuardia and watched them hit the cross. I watched the Tracon, you know, pack the runways at Kennedy, and it just, throughout the country, Washington Center, New York Center, all integrated, doing an amazing job. Could we get better? Absolutely. With technology and new procedures, we certainly could. But when you just put out that broad statement, let's fix the East Coast, or let's fix, you know, the Northeast Corridor, what's broken? What's broken? And yeah, I like what the group came up with, and I'm more than happy to go in there and roll up our sleeves. And I haven't been shy to say at New York TRACON, I have a severe, and New York Center, severe staffing right now. And we've worked collaboratively with the agency, and I think we're going to pop us out of that staffing bubble probably spring of next year, I hope. You know, it's 2.5 years in the making of changing training in Oklahoma City, possibly doing local hiring for people that really want to live on Long Island, and focusing on those things. So from the controller standpoint, our staffing is one of the things where, you know, we're deeply concerned about it for the Northeast Corridor, and we've worked on that collaboratively, and I think that's going to get better. And sure, modern technology and modern procedures, but we all have to bite off the bullet when the noise complaints come, right? Because there's going to be shifting of flights, there's going to be extra noise. We know with modern technology, the winners are the winners, and the losers are the real losers, because they hear every airplane when we proceduralize. And the other thing I've always wanted everyone to be cautious with is we are efficient because we have flexibility in what we do with these airplanes, be able to turn them, slow them. If we regiment and you know, automate this thing down to we don't have control to do that, and take them off routes or slow them down, or you lose efficiency and you lose capacity. And we have to, there's a fine line from automating everything to losing 100% capacity or efficiency and capacity. And I've been trying to tell people that for a long time. You have to be very careful with that, because the human in the loop, with the controllers at the glass and the pilots at the controls, being able to dynamically move them to fill a gap, to me, that's where you get the efficiency. And that's a big concern when we continue to automate everything down to the point where we will lose capacity at these airports. Then we'll really say, let's fix the Northeast Corridor.
Yeah, so it's about finding the right balance.
Yes.
So Warren, I thought I'd come back to you, and maybe you can convey some of the unique things that have happened within our NEC group. There's probably 20 of our colleagues who've worked very hard with us here in the room today, and a larger group that we sometimes only see on the phone. But they've all contributed in pretty unique ways, and Paul made reference, as I think Glenn did as well, to some of the fast iteration work that we've done with the facilities through FAA's assistance and Paul's assistance. But maybe there are some other aspects of it that have impressed you in particular. As Steve Dixon said, somehow the music stopped and you and I were still standing, and there we were, working on the Northeast Corridor. So maybe you can share some of what your experience has been.
Sure, yeah. Steve mentioned it, but when we first started working in just the timing of the NAC meetings, we were under a pretty compressed timeline to bring forth the first list of initiatives, we called them, to try to drive some improvement in the performance in the Northeast Corridor. And I think it was Steve that actually is credited with the phrase of clearing the underbrush. So a lot of these items were not new ideas. They'd been around for some time. For whatever reason, they were not brought to completion. So whether it was adjusting an MDA on an approach, or completing an airport infrastructure project, which obviously had been funded and scheduled long before. There was a lot of those kind of tactical items that we cleared out. On the second report, we had the opportunity to really step back and and categorize items into more operational needs. So we got more into how do we address arrival and throughput into LaGuardia, for example, or departure throughput. And I think some of the more unique, for me, as we started looking at this, it's not just the activities that occur within the Northeast Corridor. You start thinking about flow and arrival into the Northeast. So whether it's offshore routes, whether it's tunneling routes leaving or high altitude routes exiting the Northeast Corridor, there's ways you can utilize the airspace and set up the airspace better to make it run as more efficiently or as efficient as it possibly can. I think some of the most creative ideas have been around looking at current standards, and is there a way to look at closely spaced airports? Can we treat them in runways at closely spaced airports? Can we treat arrivals into those separate airports using some of the standards we have today around closely spaced runways into a single airport? And there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it's been mentioned that the nice thing about the membership on the NIWIG was it wasn't just a bunch of people in a room coming up with great ideas. Any idea that originated in the room went back into the center to see it. Is this something that really can be implemented? So that back and forth feedback really helped us to discard the wild ideas that really either weren't going to bring benefit or just couldn't be done, and focus on the ones that could. So as you start thinking about how do we maybe look at current standards, I know we talked a bit about safety in the previous panel. I mean, our safety record is quite strong, and technology is assisted with that. Is there a way that we can use some of that to maybe address some of the current standards and apply them to allow us to take better advantage of the airspace?
So Glenn and Paul, maybe just a quick follow-up from your perspective. I think in our 9 months or so, there have probably been 4 or 5 iterative passes back through the facilities and facility management, to take the ideas that Warren talked about and to further refine them, find out if they're viable or not. In some ways, do you see the prospect that could become a more common practice across the country as various groups look at change in the future? Have you all talked about that or thought about that as being a work method that could help arguably refine ideas much earlier and get down to a practical set that could be implemented?
Well, I certainly agree and again appreciate the work that's been done, because I think it has been an effective process to get us to where we are today. And I would also agree on this becoming a process that we duplicate and take across the country for all of the right reasons. One that I find is we probably have, or at least I believe we have more change we could take to the field today, one, than we ever have, and two, that they can accept all at the same time. So a lot of these conversations have begun at various locations, really simply trying to time everything that we're trying to bring on at these facilities, especially with Datacom on the en route environment, as well as soon to be our TFDM program in the terminal environments. These are major programs that are going to affect facilities over an extended period of time. And so we're having to really time all of these changes, and that's really precipitating the need to really duplicate this effort as we've done here for the NIWIG in the Northeast.
Yeah, I truly agree. It's the best process. Collaboration at the local level, where the user is going to be hands-on on either procedures or equipment. That's where you're going to get the best results. I think that's where you're going to stay under budget with contracts, because you know that information up front. That's where you're going to save time if you're not chasing a wild idea and a lot of resources, then put it in there and realize it doesn't work. It seems logical. It has taken us a long time to get there, but I think ownership on everybody's part, I think it's a great way moving forward, so that we can modernize the NAS in a more timely way.
So Huntley, there was an element that has come into our conversations that I thought I'd ask you to comment on, and that's the larger subject of how do we synchronize investment in a way that it's most efficient and better predict when an airport authority, let's say, might be able to make an investment occur when operators might be able to make their investment, and how that could all be coordinated effectively with a federal investment coming through FAA, and what is the best way to synchronize all that, right? Not only because it's efficient economically, but it builds confidence in the outcomes that we can achieve as an integrated team. How do you see the potential for that over the longer term across the Northeast Corridor? I mean, there are major airports all across the Northeast Corridor. You know, New York's important, I guess, but, you know, Boston is not unimportant, and Philly's not unimportant, nor is Washington. So what's been your experience in that area?
So airports, each individual airport actually will do a 5-year, 10-year airport capital improvement program. And so we generally work independently and we'll bring in our stakeholders as appropriate when we're doing a capital plan. But with the work of the NAC and also NIWIG, we've actually been able to work with industry in a collaborative and transparent way to share what we're thinking about for the long term so that it does synchronize with industry. I mean, one such example is GBAS. So the NAC and NIWIG thought that, you know, GBAS technology would be important to implement over the long term. So the authority itself started to look at GBAS. We already have that in place at Newark Airport, and we're actually working on the next generation of GBAS for that installation. But now we're focused on ensuring that that program is in the capital plan, and it also is going to synchronize with the needs of industry and stakeholders. We've had conversations with different carriers about the timing for you know, changed equipage on aircraft. So I think it happens when you have an industry group like the NAC and NIWIG to go through what airports are thinking about investment so that you can ensure that it's syncing up with what's going on in industry. In each of these collaborative discussions, we're able to find out what airlines are planning, you know, what's happening organically, or what are some of the things they're doing strategically. And the same thing with the FAA. So what we've been learning is that we need to do a lot more of that. And we've got folks that are on the various you know, NAC subcommittees, and I hope in the future we'll get an opportunity to continue to forge these dialogues where we can share what we're thinking about, because we have a vested interest in making sure that our airports operate more efficiently. As I've said before, with the investments that we're making, it's not just about the terminal experience. We're very focused and concerned about the overall customer experience. So it's critical that we leverage the efficiency of industry and other stakeholders. So again, NAC does it, the NIWIG does it, and hopefully we can continue that kind of dialogue where it's collaborative but also transparent.
So Steve, I thought I'd follow up with you just a little beyond the NEC work. Similar question, you know, with regard to the other NIWIG teams and the domains that they're all focused on. With you being able to have a kind of a broad cross-sectional view of what they're doing, how do you see that evolving opportunity on synchronized investment? Do you see areas where we could become strategically better at the way we do that across that entire platform of the NIWIG capabilities?
Well, I certainly think that you know, the plans themselves have tended to be, and both on the industry and on the FAA side, have tended to be somewhat static, although there is a rolling plan process. But I think that we need to be willing to put milestones and accomplishments out there with some stretch in them. Because it's easy to say, well, we will get program XYZ done at this particular point in time, and look at it from that perspective rather than what are we trying to do. In other words, GBAS is a good example. GBAS is a great capability, but where are we going to apply it and to what benefit? I mean, that's the lens that we should be looking at. How is it going to improve the performance of the system? When we set our business plans within the airline, you know, we'll make the business case as the FAA will, but if everything is green all the time on the chart, that's actually not a good thing, because that means that you're not challenging yourself. Now, you know, the thing that's not negotiable is safety. This is where some of the human factors and making sure the controllers are involved, the airports, the pilots, is extremely important, because we've got to move all of this forward without upsetting the apple cart from a safety perspective. But as soon as we write a plan, we write a 3-year plan for one of the NIWG initiatives, and everybody's happy with where it is. As soon as that's done, as soon as the ink is dry on it, things start to change. And there are going to be challenges and there are going to be opportunities. And so I think that, again, taking that holistic approach and continually evaluating where we are in the process and being able to, certainly keep a consistent strategic direction, but look at how the environment has changed, whether it's the equipage of the operators or the configuration of the airspace, whatever the case may be. We've got to be able to make adjustments along the way a little bit more dynamically than we've been able to historically.
So Paul, you're a member of the NAC, and the next meeting will be June 27th. Warren and I will bring the group's work to the NAC.
Steve will.
But then, our recommendation as part of the format for that NAC meeting is that there be a set of conversations among the NAC members related to the importance of community outreach across the Northeast Corridor and various metropolitan domains to enable a lot of the recommendations, technical recommendations that we'll bring forward. And then also a conversation, hopefully strategic as well, about the whole need to synchronize investment, equipage, to facility investments for controllers and to surface investments at the airports. So having served on the NAC for a while and anticipating that conversation, what is your view of the maybe best way to structure it? What do you see as a possible outcome?
Well, it's a great question, and I've been on the NAC from the beginning, and I must just take 2 moments to say, under Margaret Jennings' leadership and the RTCA, the NAC has done amazing work, and thank you for everything you have done, because we focused on modernizing our system, and we focused on real issues, and we have real tangible things that we could look at and say we have modernized the system under your leadership, so thank you very much. As we move forward with the NextGen Advisory Committee and as we get this report, there's ownership, right? We're going to have to go into, there's going to be tough things to do with the community if we're going to change routes or if we're going to streamline it. What Warren said about, standards and decoupling the airports, that's hard work. That's really hard work, and it doesn't happen overnight. That's going to take a long time to do something like that, because we run the safest, most efficient system in the world, and safety is the bottom line. There's nobody that ever wants to jeopardize safety. So we have to make sure that, that standard was set for a reason. Now, if it's too much, then let's make sure that, we get it right, but never, ever jeopardize safety. So as we look at each one of these initiatives, we have to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work. But as I said earlier, we need the controllers off the positions to help us with procedures and equipment. And right now, it's tight. It's tight up there on Long Island and in many of our facilities. So we have to get our staffing to a proper level so that we can get the subject matter experts out to roll up their sleeves and enhance the system.
All right, so I think we want to go ahead and go to audience participant questions. Andy, you want to go with the first one?
Okay, great, thanks. I actually have 2 questions. One's for me. This one is not. Implementation of Datacom en route is in full swing. Tower services are, have been rolled out. So how does that play into the Northeast Corridor? And then after that question gets answered for you, because you're representing a very important aspect of the NEC flights, how do you see the business aviation community's role in the NEC improvements moving forward?
Well, so within the recommendations that NEC is bringing forward, there are a number of them that address the reliever airports around the major metropolitan areas, you know, whether it's Washington, Philly, Boston, New York, you know, probably most prominent among those early on in our work, obviously been White Plains and Teterboro and some of the New York metro airports. So we've got recommendations on procedural changes like we do in the commercial carrier environment for the larger hub airports. And I think all of that will be very helpful. The overall strategy of separating the airports and making them more independent will be helpful for the reliever airports as much as it is for the commercial hubs. So the strategies themselves really work across operator domains. And sometimes you have to tailor them to a specific airport, but for the most part, the broad metro area changes and the en route changes will be beneficial. Warren made reference to the high altitude en route access to oceanic routes that we've recommended. I mean, those benefit the general and business aviation community as well. So I think there's, you know, great synergy in all of that work, and the group has really focused on it in that way, and it's been very beneficial. Yes, well, Datacom, okay. So we've worked with the FAA Program Office from a business aviation point of view. Early Datacom services available at Teterboro and Van Nuys and a bunch of places around the United States as an early effort in our community to bring NextGen and that service into their world. And so that's been going really well. We're really grateful to the program office, including those key business aviation airports. And so far the feedback from our members has been very good.
And maybe, Andy, to pick up from the, you know, from the commercial airline perspective, I think investments in Datacom, I think those will have a role in improving the Northeast Corridor, as it will the entire NASA, the implementation schedule. I don't think we go to the Northeast Corridor first, but at JetBlue, 70% of our flying is in and out of the Northeast Corridor. Majority of that's out of New York and Boston, and so we've made significant investment, not just in Datacom, but also in ADS-B and the MMRs to enable us to fly GBAS in the future. And we'll continue to make you know, investments with the, you know, considering the amount of our flying that occurs in that airspace. We have a huge interest in ensuring we can operate, of course, never compromising safety, but as efficiently as we can.
So another question about mixed equipage and how, you know, you can leverage the advanced capabilities of some aircraft in the fleet at the same time addressing Paul's issues of, but how do you maintain that capacity?
Yeah. So maybe, Glenn, you want to try that one first? I mean, you deal with mixed equipage in a lot of strategic programs within the FAA, right? You know, all across the CNS ATM program area that in the ATO, and so how do you see the most effective approach to that?
Well, I think some of the challenge that I see in our operation today is there were a lot of changes, be it technology, certainly a lot of procedures were actually rolled out and trained to the controller under the guise of, well, once they've equipped and they're able to do this, then you'll use it. And so we have put a lot of things in the system that controllers essentially somewhat ignore today because we think there's something else coming. I think the realization is that waiting and waiting for some 100% equipage is a poor choice on everyone's part, because I think there's more equipage to come. There's more great ideas, there's more opportunities to advance our technology. There's more and more people that want into the air that's going to force us into new technologies. And so I think that the idea around mixed equipage has got to start a conversation around how do we provide the maximum amount of benefits in a given market, given the equipage and given the things that we've been able to implement there. We've already taken a new approach in looking at our time-based operations and the changes that we want to affect moving forward, to really sitting down with the controller and making sure that each of the controllers have the tools that they need, and not expecting every one of them to have all of the same tools and then find that they don't need them. So I think it's a reality for us, but I don't know that we've done a wholesale approach to say, here's the maximum benefits we can provide given the current situation at the market.
You know, I think with mixed equipage, and we've been talking about this a long time, is when you get to a point of saturation in a sector, it falls down to least common denominator, because they all have to do the same thing now, because if the high-tech airplane is able to do something, but the low-tech is not, they all have to land on the same concrete. So we have to focus on that. You know, I opened up and said, I drive 95 and 395, and there's hot lanes. Well, that's mixed equipage. I have an easy pass. I get in those hot lanes. I pay extra money to drive in so I don't sit in 95 traffic all day long. That's the reality. Without building more runways, and I know in the Northeast Corridor there's no room to build runways. If you remember back before we had the 5th runway at Atlanta, Atlanta was severely delayed because of capacity. We put the 5th runway in, and Atlanta is one of the most efficient airports now. Well, we don't have that flexibility at LaGuardia or Kennedy or Boston or DCA. So we have to figure out, you know, new ways to deal with this, because you're always going to have the mixed equipage. But when you get busy, it's least common denominator. Everybody's going to go low, slow, and do it so that safety is maintained.
Well, certainly what Warren and I have seen in this Northeast Corridor discussion is, you know, every operator community has its high-tech and its low-tech population, whether it's the military, general and business aviation, the commercial carriers with the RJs, or, you know, whatever it may be. Everybody's got a spectrum of equipage capabilities. And what that has left us with is that one of the key challenges from a policy perspective for the NAC, I think in the future, for FAA leadership is, again, how do we synchronize investment, right? How do we know what a tolerable equipage investment for operators is, match that to what's happening with the airports on the surface, match that with FAA's program innovations in the facilities and staffing and all of that. A big dialogue at the NAC about how can we better synchronize investment is a pretty high leverage activity. Steve.
So just one point. I think it's always important to, when we get into these discussions about mixed equipage, to recognize that mixed equipage doesn't necessarily mean mixed capability, right? Because there are multiple, if we're talking about deconflicting airports, you know, we got to step back and say, well, what are we trying to accomplish here? And then what are the tools in the toolbox that allow us, with the current environment, to achieve that goal? In one case, it may be something that's very technology intensive. Another case, you know, Warren mentioned some little bit different, you know, arrival configurations and things like that, that really just involve changes to the operation. They could be changes to the things that we're doing on the flight deck or things that we train. It could be surface projects that create, you know, even though we're not building more runways, if we build an end-around taxiway, if we build gates that are more interchangeable, you know, all of those things have benefit that tend to propagate out into the airspace. So if we have better traffic flow management tools, a lot of the choke points that we have today, you know, will not be the same level of pain. So mixed equipage, yeah, that's an issue, but I think we always need to step back, and I think that's what the NEC group has done. Step back and look at what are we trying to achieve here with these areas of operational need, and then apply the appropriate solution to the problem. That may be equipage, it may not be.
Yeah. So Andy, the time clock says all zeros, so it's back to you. Thank you, appreciate it.
So in addition to all of these people participating on this panel, they've also represented commitments by individuals from their organizations, plus a lot of people in this room. So let's thank them and thank all the others that have been involved in this effort.